While my son lay unconscious in the ICU, hooked up to machines and fighting for every breath, I was consumed by fear, clinging to hope. What I didn't know was that, behind my back, my own family, people I trusted most, were draining my bank account. By the time I checked, over $850,000 was gone. Not a loan, not a mistake, just cold, calculated theft when I was at my weakest. While I prayed for my child's life, they were stealing mine. Can you imagine looking your own family in the eye, after they've stolen everything you have, everything meant for your dying child, and hearing them say, "We needed it more than you"? My brother-in-law actually smirked as he said it. My world shattered right there, but oh, they had no idea what was about to hit them. Because then, the front door blasted open, and trust me, you're going to want to hear how this story ends. Hey everyone, I'm the parent of an incredible 8-year-old boy, Eli. Right now, as I tell you this, he's fighting for his life in the ICU. Imagine spending weeks in a hospital, the smell of antiseptic clinging to everything, the constant, soul-crushing beep of machines behind a closed door, just praying for your child to survive. That was my world. I'm a 39-year-old single dad, running my own little design business, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was Eli's next breath. Every single dollar I'd saved over the last decade, every late night, every client I bent over backward for, it was all for him. It was our safety net. My financial rock. I told myself, no matter what else life threw at us, at least we'd be okay. That belief, that tiny shred of security, was the only thing keeping me upright as I paced those sterile hospital hallways. Then, one day, almost out of habit, I pulled out my phone. Maybe I just wanted to reassure myself that when the hospital came with the next bill, I could handle it. The banking app opened. I blinked once. Then twice. My stomach physically dropped. Checking account? 0. Savings? 0. Business account? Also 0. For a terrifying moment, I thought it was some kind of glitch, a mistake. I refreshed. I tried another card. The same blank screen. My hands started to shake violently. The walls of that hallway felt like they were closing in. My own pulse was roaring so loud in my ears, I almost missed the nurse calling a name down the hall. I forced myself to dial the bank, my voice a strangled whisper as I gave them my information. The woman on the other end sounded so calm. So maddeningly calm, like she wasn't telling me my entire life had just been utterly erased. "Yes, sir," she said. "I see several transfers overnight. They were authorized from a recognized device linked to your account." "No," I choked out, my voice cracking. "That's not possible. I didn't." She cut me off, her tone carefully measured, sterile. "I understand this is difficult, but the security questions were answered correctly. The transfers were made between 11:40 p.m. and 4 p.m. It felt like a physical blow. A punch straight to the gut. Someone had not just gone into my accounts, someone who knew my deepest, most private information, someone I trusted, had taken every single cent. I hung up the phone without even saying goodbye, my hands so unsteady I nearly dropped it. My whole world gone. By the time I left the hospital, the Portland sky had already gone completely dark, the cool night air biting at my skin. I drove on autopilot, my mind a storm of disbelief and pure dread. I was heading to their lake house. That place, man, it was supposed to be a refuge, a happy memory. Barbecues, summer weekends with family. Tonight, though, it felt like enemy territory. I didn't knock. I just pushed the door open, hard. My footsteps echoed, loud and angry, on the old wooden floor. The laughter from the living room died instantly. There he was, Gideon, my brother-in-law, sprawled on the couch, a whiskey glass dangling in his hand like he owned the place. And next to him, my sister, Serena, her eyes darting between me and the floor, her whole body shrinking in on itself. "Where is it?" I demanded, my voice sharp, raw. Gideon's lips curled into that smug, little smile, the one I've hated since the day I first met him. "Well, hello to you too," he drawled. I took a step closer, my fists clenching so hard my knuckles popped. Don't play games with me. My accounts are empty. All of them. Where's my money? He leaned back, took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink, and then he said it. The words that will forever haunt me. We needed it more than you. It landed like a slap, a physical blow. My ears rang. For a moment, I couldn't even process the sheer audacity. Excuse me? I choked out. Then, Serena finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Don't make this about you. I laughed then, a hollow, bitter sound. Don't make this about me? $850,000. My son, my Eli, is in the ICU fighting for his life, and you two drain me dry. How is this not about me? Gideon just shrugged, as if the conversation bored him. You'll figure it out. You always do. The rage simmering inside me, it threatened to spill over, to consume me. But I swallowed it down. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. My entire world was burning, and they just sat there in their comfortable little bubble, sipping whiskey, like they hadn't just destroyed absolutely everything I had. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing my voice to steady. Then you won't mind what's coming next? They exchanged a quick glance. Then Gideon let out a short, dismissive laugh. Serena gave a little chuckle, too, like I was some pathetic joke they'd already heard before. Smug. Untouchable. But then, just for a second, I saw it. A tiny crack in Gideon's mask. I stepped back onto the porch, the cold night air pressing against me like a physical weight. Their laughter, hollow and sharp, still echoed in my ears. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from Serena. Don't make this about you. We're all struggling. I reread it twice, my thumb hovering, wishing I could erase those words with sheer will. My son, Eli, was lying in a hospital bed, machines breathing for him. And she had the audacity to send me that? My throat tightened. For a moment, I considered just leaving, walking away, letting them win their little charade. But I knew what that would mean. They'd paint me as the unstable one, the bitter sibling who couldn't handle their own failures. I stood there, staring at the glow from their windows, and a fierce resolve took hold. This wasn't about them. This was about Eli. This was about every single hour I'd worked, every sacrifice I'd made, to make sure we'd be okay. When I walked back into that lake house, it was like stepping into a different universe. The living room, which had been chaotic moments before, now hummed with the sounds of a family dinner. I found myself in the dining room, and it felt like I'd stumbled into someone else's life. The table was meticulously set for 12, every plate, every glass perfectly placed. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, herbs, and expensive wine. Everyone else looked so relaxed, laughing, exchanging pleasantries as if this was just any other night. But when they saw me, the entire room shifted. Eyes flicked my way, then just as quickly, turned back to their conversations. No one offered me a seat. No one even acknowledged I'd come back. I found myself at the far end of the table, as far from the laughter as possible, tucked away in Gideon's shadow. He sat at the head, of course, his arm draped casually over Serena's chair, basking in the attention like he was some benevolent host. I barely tasted the food. My fork scraped against the plate in slow, deliberate movements as I tried to focus on anything but that smug smirk across the table. My mind kept drifting, back to Eli, his pale face, the agonizing beep of the monitors. Then, back to the terrifying zero on my bank screen. How could they sit here, eating so comfortably, knowing what they'd done? Halfway through the meal, Gideon decided to speak. You know, he drawled, raising his glass as if delivering some profound insight. His voice carried through the room, dripping with fake sympathy. Some people just aren't cut out for managing money. It's sad, really. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. No one, not a single person, dared to meet my eyes. Serena just stared at her plate, her fingers tapping lightly against her wine glass stem. No defense. No apology. Just silence. My stomach churned. I set my fork down. I wanted to scream. To lay every bit of their betrayal bare for that entire room to hear. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, cataloging every word, every look. Let them think they'd humiliated me. Let them think I was beaten. As the evening dragged on, I studied them. Gideon using his words like weapons, subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, but sharp enough to wound. Serena, leaning into his protection, hiding behind his cruelty as if it excused her complicity. And everyone else, avoiding me, choosing the comfort of their ignorance over the discomfort of truth. I stayed quiet. My silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Every insult, every glance, every cold shoulder, it was fuel. They'd taken my money. My dignity. They tried to strip me of my worth. But they couldn't take my resolve. By the time dessert was served, I wasn't the same person who'd walked through that door. I wasn't just the grieving father, or the desperate parent clinging to hope. I was someone who'd been pushed to the absolute edge, and decided he wasn't going to fall. But they weren't done humiliating me. Not by a long shot. I lingered in the hallway longer than I should have, letting their voices fade into the hum of crickets outside. The laughter from that table still echoed in my head, clashing with the image of Eli in that hospital bed. My hands felt cold, my fingers stiff around the phone I hadn't managed to put down since Serena's sickening text. After a few deep breaths, I forced myself back into the dining room. That's when I noticed it. My seat had been moved. I'd been at the far end before, but now I was practically next to the kitchen door. It was a spot where servers would brush by with plates. A clear, deliberate message that I didn't deserve to sit among them. Someone had done it, and they absolutely wanted me to notice. I stood there for a moment, taking in the perfect scene, candles burning low, crystal glasses catching the light. And at the opposite end, Gideon, leaning back in his chair, completely at ease. He didn't even glance up at me. Every scrape of a fork, every muffled giggle from the other end of the table felt choreographed. I'd never felt so visible, and yet so invisible, all at once. They didn't need to shout or point fingers. This was more cutting than any screaming match. This was quiet, calculated humiliation, telling me exactly where I stood, outside of them. I slid into my new spot without a word, the chair creaking as I pulled it in. My hands itched to grab my bag, to just leave. But I stayed. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was because I knew walking out would be exactly what they wanted. Then I saw it. A familiar glint caught my eye, reflecting the low light from the chandelier. Gideon raised his arm as he gestured to someone across the table. And there it was. On his wrist. My father's watch. For a second, I couldn't breathe. That Omega watch wasn't just some accessory. It had been my father's. The one he'd worn to every single meaningful occasion. The one he'd handed to me just 2 days before he passed away. I could still hear his voice, frail and soft, saying, "This stays with you. It's part of you now." And here it was, on Gideon. I gripped the napkin in my lap so tightly the fabric twisted in my hands. He tapped the face of the watch as he laughed at something one of my uncles said, like he knew exactly what he was doing. Like he wanted me to see it. Through the blur of conversations and clinking glasses, my pulse roared in my ears. I replayed that moment in the hospital, my father's hand, frail and cool, pressing that watch into mine. How could Gideon have it now? The dinner dragged on in a haze. I didn't taste the food. I barely heard the small talk. All I could focus on was that watch, and the dull, suffocating ache in my chest. When dessert was served, I stood abruptly, muttering something about needing air. My feet carried me to the hallway, where the buzz of voices dulled. I didn't wait long. Serena slipped out a few minutes later, her heels clicking softly on the wooden floor. "Why does he have Dad's watch?" My voice was low, but it came out sharper than I intended. She stopped mid-step, but she didn't even turn to face me. "It's just a watch," she said quietly. Too quickly. "No," I said, stepping closer. "Don't do that. Dad gave it to me. He told me it was mine. So tell me why your husband is wearing it like some trophy." She finally glanced back, her expression unreadable. "You always make things so difficult," she whispered. "It's just sharing the family legacy. You need to let things go. Let it go." I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. First the money, and now this? Do you hear yourself? She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly small, like she was retreating into his shadow even when he wasn't physically there. "Please, just don't start something tonight. Not here." Her words weren't a defense. They were a dismissal. A desperate plea for me to stay quiet so everyone else could keep their illusion of harmony intact. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. I walked back to the guest room, the one they'd stuck me in at the farthest corner of the house, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were still trembling, but now it wasn't from shock. It was pure, unadulterated rage, simmering under the surface. My father was gone, my savings were stolen, and my own sister had chosen to stand by while her husband paraded around in something that was never, ever his. That night, I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours. I thought about Eli. About my father. About how easily they'd erased me from everything that mattered. And I made myself a promise. I wouldn't let them erase me. Not as a son. Not as a father. Not as anything. But the watch wasn't the only thing they'd stolen from me. I didn't sleep a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was Gideon's wrist, my father's watch gleaming like a taunt. I saw Serena's carefully blank face when I'd confronted her. I felt the way they made me feel like I didn't belong in a house my own father had built. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling like the walls of that guest room were closing in on me. Around midnight, I finally gave up trying to sleep. The house was still, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator somewhere in the distance. I got up and padded barefoot into the hallway, careful not to make the old wood creak. I'd spent countless holidays in this place, Christmas mornings in pajamas, summer barbecues with my dad on the porch. But now, those memories felt like they belonged to someone else's life entirely. I found myself drifting toward the study. My father had always kept his most important papers in there. Even after he passed, Serena insisted the room be left exactly as it was. But something about it tonight felt altered. When I opened the door, the familiar smell of old leather and dust hit me, but the room just didn't look right. The desk drawers weren't as neat as I remembered. Folders that should have been perfectly aligned were slightly ajar, some stacked awkwardly. I flicked on the small desk lamp, its yellow glow making the shadows dance across the walls, and started pulling things out. It was aimless at first, just searching for what I didn't even know. But as my fingers grazed the edge of a large envelope tucked beneath some tax documents, my pulse quickened. My name was on it, written in my father's unmistakable hand. I slid it open, my fingers shaking slightly. Inside were estate documents. Updated ones. At first, my tired brain thought it was misreading them. But no. The words were clear. The notarization dates stared back at me like an accusation. My father's original will had ensured I received a share of the lake house, along with part of his business assets. He told me himself. But these papers stripped me of nearly everything. Key properties, liquid assets, even parts of the family business. Quietly reassigned. All in Serena and Gideon's names. My throat tightened. I had to sit down before my knees gave out. I read through each page, my heart pounding louder with every single line. The dates were months after my father's funeral. It didn't make any sense. He couldn't have signed these. He was gone. The realization sank in like a stone in water. They hadn't just taken my savings. They'd taken my inheritance. They had tampered with the one thing my father had left to ensure I'd be okay. I wanted to scream. To wake them up and demand answers. But the house was silent. And in that silence, I felt something else settling over me. Fury, yes, but also absolute clarity. They thought I wouldn't find this. They thought I wouldn't fight back. I sat there for what felt like hours, the papers spread out on the desk, my fingers tracing my father's signature. Whether it was real or forged, I didn't know yet. My chest ached, but my mind was sharp. Clearer than it had been in days. They've taken everything, I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible in the heavy stillness. But they don't know me as well as they think. I gathered the documents carefully, folding them back into the envelope. As I turned off the lamp and stepped back into the dark hallway, I felt a profound shift inside me. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about erasure. About them rewriting the story of my family, without me in it. And they were absolutely not going to get away with it. Then, as if to grind me further into the ground, Gideon made his boldest move yet. The morning arrived, heavy and gray, like the weather itself understood the bleakness waiting for me. I barely slept. By the time I walked into the living room, Gideon had already staged his twisted scene. Relatives I hadn't seen in months were gathered on the couches, some perched awkwardly on armrests. Gideon stood in the middle, like he was the master of ceremonies, a thick manila envelope clutched in his hand. That same smug curve on his mouth. "Glad you're here," he said, his voice syrupy sweet and loud enough for everyone to hear. "We were just about to clear the air." My stomach churned. I didn't like his tone. I definitely didn't like the way Serena stood behind him, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the carpet, as if she wished the floor would just swallow her whole. He opened the envelope with theatrical slowness, like a magician about to unveil a great truth. "You've been saying I took your money," he said, glancing at me. "But here's the thing. That's not how it happened." I couldn't respond. My throat felt seized. He held up a document, flipping it towards the room. "You all should know," he announced, his voice booming. "He voluntarily entrusted me with $850,000. It was a loan for a family investment." My heart slammed against my ribs. He walked toward me, waving the papers. "Your signature is right here." And there it was. My name. My handwriting. Or what could pass for it, perfect enough to almost convince me that I had signed it during some forgotten, sleep-deprived night. Gasps filled the room. A few aunts leaned closer to get a better look. One of my cousins murmured something. "Oh, that makes sense now." "See?" Gideon said, his voice dripping with false benevolence. "You're making me out to be a thief, but I've only been holding what you gave me for us." For us. As if this had ever been for anyone but him. My knees felt weak. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I argue with a piece of paper that said otherwise? How could I defend myself when my own family already looked at me like I'd lost my mind? I scanned the room, desperately searching for someone, anyone, to back me up. Serena wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stared at the floor like a child caught in a lie. And that told me everything I needed to know. "You forged that," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Gideon chuckled, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Of course you'd say that. That's what people do when they regret their decisions. They rewrite history." The room shrank around me. I could feel their judgment like a physical weight pressing into my chest. A few relatives exchanged uneasy looks, and I knew exactly what they were thinking. Maybe he really is unstable. Maybe Gideon is telling the truth. I wanted to scream. To rip those papers from his hands and set them on fire. But I didn't. I couldn't. My throat closed around the words. I felt small. Voiceless. By the time I walked out of that house, I don't even remember saying goodbye. Hours later, I was in my car, parked outside the ICU. I don't remember the drive. I just remember staring at the dashboard, numb. My son, Eli, was inside, still fighting for his life. Tubes and machines doing what his little body couldn't. And here I was, stripped of everything. My money. My dignity. Even my place in my own family's story. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for my tears to dry on my cheeks. For my breathing to slow to that hollow, defeated rhythm. My gaze drifted to the passenger seat. Eli's stuffed blue bear was slumped there, its fur worn from years of bedtime hugs. I picked it up, pressing it to my chest. And in that small, familiar weight, I felt my resolve spark again. If I give up, I whispered to no one but the quiet car, what does that make me for him? I couldn't let them win. Not like this. And then, a single, unexpected voice gave me the first glimmer of hope. That voice. It came exactly when I had stopped expecting to hear anything good. It was late evening, the ICU waiting room bathed in that eerie glow of fluorescent lights, the constant, dull hum of machines somewhere beyond the double doors. I'd been sitting there for hours, head in my hands, numb from everything. Gideon's false papers. My family's gutless silence. Eli's tiny, fragile body fighting behind that closed door. Time in that place didn't move. It just pressed on you like a heavy, dull, relentless weight. My mind couldn't let go of Gideon's face, that smirk, those forged signatures that looked so real I'd almost started to believe them myself. I kept replaying the scene in the living room over and over, each time trying to think of a sharper comeback, a way to make them hear me. But every imagined response just fell flat, because in the real world, he'd walked away with everyone's sympathy and my entire life in his hands. I didn't even notice Marcy until she was sitting right beside me. "Hey," she said softly, like she wasn't sure I'd even want to hear her voice. I blinked at her, disoriented. Marcy was my cousin, the quiet one, the one who always stayed out of family drama, who just smiled at holidays and avoided anything resembling conflict. She wasn't supposed to be here. I couldn't just sit with it, she said quickly, her eyes darting toward the hallway as if making sure no one else followed her. "I had to tell you what I know." "What do you mean?" My voice came out hoarse, like I hadn't spoken in days. She twisted her hands in her lap. "Gideon, he likes to drink late at night. Whiskey, usually. And when he does, he talks too much." Something in my chest tightened. "Marcy," I said carefully, my heart starting to pound. "What are you trying to tell me?" She took a deep breath. "I overheard him bragging about you. About the money." My pulse quickened. "Bragging about what, exactly?" She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "He said he drained your accounts. Said he forged the papers so no one would ever believe you. He laughed about it. Said you'd handed him the rope to hang you with. His words, not mine." The room tilted for a second. I gripped the edge of my chair, trying to ground myself. Then Marcy added, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. "I recorded part of it. I didn't know what to do with it, but I couldn't stay quiet anymore." She slid the phone across to me. My fingers felt clumsy as I pressed play. There it was. His voice. That lazy, arrogant drawl. "He's too naive to fight back. Signed everything like a good little mark." He laughed like ruining my life was some kind of sport. It was him. No question. I stared at the phone for a long moment before I looked at Marcy. "Why are you telling me this now?" Her eyes filled with something that looked like guilt. "Because I should have said something earlier. And because you need help. I know someone who can give it to you. An old college friend of mine, Drake. He's a legal investigator. He deals with people like Gideon for a living." For the first time in weeks, I felt air fill my lungs fully. A way forward. Marcy must have seen it on my face because she touched my arm lightly. "You don't have to do this alone." That single sentence hit harder than Gideon's lies ever could. I wasn't alone. By the time we left the hospital for a late-night diner, the heaviness had shifted. It was still there, sure, but under it, a new current ran. Cautious hope. Determination. We sat in a quiet booth, nursing bad coffee, while Marcy laid out what Drake could do: gather evidence, track financial trails, make all those family investments unravel in a courtroom where Gideon couldn't hide behind his charm. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, staring at the steam rising from it. "I'm done being their scapegoat," I said, more to myself than to her. "If Gideon wants a war, he'll get one." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I actually meant it. The first step, gathering enough evidence to bring their empire crashing down. It started with a choice. To stop surviving. And to start fighting. Sitting by Eli's bed again, feeling his little fingers curled around mine, I knew I couldn't afford another day of paralysis. His cheeks had more color than before, just a tiny bit, but that small change lit something fierce in me. Grief had sharpened me. Anger had given me purpose. They'd taken my money, my family name, even my father's legacy. But they were not going to take my son's future. Marcy kept her word. 2 days later, she walked me into a co-working space downtown, a sleek room with glass walls and humming printers. That's where I met Drake. He was everything Gideon wasn't. Focused. Efficient. No time for theatrics. He shook my hand firmly, his dark eyes studying me like he was already taking inventory of my entire case. Marcy filled me in, he said, his voice steady, professional. We can nail him, but we need airtight proof. Digital paper. And ideally, his own words. That's how you win. For the first time in weeks, I heard someone talk about winning, not just surviving. He laid out the plan: retrieve a full record of login and transactions tied to my stolen accounts, secure copies of the altered inheritance documents, and if I had the stomach for it, catch Gideon bragging on camera. He'll slip, Drake assured me. People like him always do. Over the next several days, my life became a frantic blur, a routine of ICU visits, my apartment, and Drake's workspace. Mornings with Eli, afternoons with Drake, nights lying awake connecting dots. Watching Drake work was its own kind of education. He combed through my laptop, my phone backups, even cloud accounts I hadn't accessed in months. One afternoon, he called me over. Take a look at this. On his screen was a log. Dozens of unauthorized logins to my accounts, all within a tight window. These were made from your devices, he said, pointing to the timestamps. Except you weren't the one logging in. See the IP addresses? They match Gideon's home and the lake house. He hadn't even bothered covering his tracks. I stared at the screen, part of me absolutely furious at his arrogance, another part, almost grateful for it. Every click Drake made, every file he pulled, pieced together the undeniable story of how Gideon had bled me dry. But Drake wasn't done. Now for the will, he said. I swallowed hard. That word still felt like a fresh wound. He explained how he'd plant a camera at the lake house. You stage a visit, he told me. Act like you're letting things go. Get him comfortable. Then let the whiskey do the rest. So I did it. A week later, I drove back to that place, smiling when I wanted to scream, pretending to accept Serena's shallow apologies, letting Gideon believe I'd been broken into submission. I tucked the camera exactly where Drake told me to. Every step rehearsed in my head until it felt like second nature. 2 days later, we sat in that glass-walled office, watching the footage together. There he was, Gideon, leaning back in his chair, drink in hand, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction. We rewrote history, he boasted to a cousin. The will, the assets, all of it. Finally put that legacy in the right hands. The right hands. Drake muted the video and looked at me. That's it. That's your nail in the coffin. I sat there, silent for a moment, letting it all sink in. He wasn't just careless. He was proud. Proud of gutting my father's last wishes. Proud of destroying me. My pulse steadied. My voice, when it came, was cold and clear. They wanted war in silence. I'll give them justice in daylight. And soon, the entire family would watch Gideon's empire burn. The invitation went out 3 days before, written in my most neutral tone. We need to end this fighting. Let's meet, all of us, at the lake house. I made it sound like I wanted peace, like I was finally ready to bury the hatchet. It was a performance, and I played it well. By the time I arrived that afternoon, the house buzzed with a low hum of uneasy conversation. Cars lined the gravel drive, and inside, aunts and cousins mingled, their voices hushed, but eager. Serena stood by the kitchen counter, twisting a napkin in her hands, avoiding my eyes. Gideon, of course, was exactly where he wanted to be, in the center of it all. Whiskey in hand, relaxed, smirking like a man about to enjoy his victory lap. Finally decided to talk like adults, huh? he said when I stepped into the living room. His tone was sweet, but it dripped with condescension. I ignored the bait. "Let's sit," I said calmly. The family gathered in the main room, filling the long couches and chairs, some standing along the walls. I took the single armchair directly opposite Gideon, the weight of everyone's stares pressing on me. But I held my ground. "This isn't easy," I began, my voice calm but steady. "But we need to talk about what's been done. To me. To my father's legacy. To my son." Gideon chuckled, a dismissive sound. "Oh, this again. You really need to let it go. We've all been through hard times." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the laptop I'd placed on the coffee table. The entire room went stone silent at the sight of it. "Before you dismiss me," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "you should hear this." I pressed play. Gideon's own voice filled the room. Drunken, brash, and utterly damning. "We rewrote history," he boasted to his cousin. "The will, the assets, all of it. Finally put that legacy in the right hands." "The right hands." Gasps ripped through the room. A few aunts exchanged horrified glances. One uncle muttered a curse under his breath. Serena went pale, clutching her napkin so tightly I thought it might tear. "You!" Gideon started, pushing himself up, but I raised my hand. "I'm not finished." Then Drake's voice came next, crisp and measured, through the speakerphone. "I've conducted a forensic analysis of the financial records," he said. "Every unauthorized transfer leads back to Gideon's devices and IP addresses. We also traced the timestamps of logins to your cloud accounts, all occurring in the early hours while you were documented elsewhere." I turned to Gideon. "You said I gave you that money as a loan. Tell them why you were logging into my accounts at 3 a.m. Tell them why my father's will, which secured me my share of this house, was rewritten in your favor after his death." He shot up from his seat, his face bright red, his mouth moving faster than his brain. "You're twisting things. You've always been unhinged. They all know it." But no one, not a single person, rushed to agree with him. The aunts stared at their laps. My uncles wouldn't meet his gaze. Even Serena's shoulders sagged, like she'd finally given up holding his flimsy lies together. "You've stolen enough," I said, rising slowly to my feet, my voice ringing with a new kind of power. "And today it ends." The timing was almost cinematic. The front door burst open with a loud thud, and uniformed officers swept inside, firm and deliberate. "Gideon Price," the lead officer called out. "You're under arrest for fraud, theft, and identity tampering. We have a warrant." Chaos erupted. Relatives jumped to their feet. Some shouting, others crying. Gideon's bravado finally cracked, replaced by a frantic kind of sputtering as he tried to talk over the officer reading his rights. Serena's sobs broke through the noise as she covered her face with her hands. The cuffs clicked around his wrists. For the first time in months, I felt my lungs expand fully, completely. He glared at me as they led him out, his voice shaking. "You think this is over? You think..." But the rest of his threats were drowned out by the decisive slam of the front door. Silence. Heavy. Profound. Serena finally looked at me. Really looked at me. With an expression I hadn't seen in years. Gratitude? Shame? I didn't know. She whispered something, a tiny, broken sound. I nodded but said nothing. The time for words had passed. I turned to the rest of the family. Their faces a mix of shock and relief, confusion and accusation. "This wasn't just about money," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned room. "This was about my father. About Eli. About every one of you who let this man take whatever he wanted because you were too afraid to call him out." No one spoke. I didn't need them to. As I walked out of that house, leaving the stunned silence behind me, one thought rang in my head like a triumphant bell. Gideon's empire had finally started to crumble. But justice in court would be nothing compared to the healing that came next. The weeks after the raid passed like moving through water, slow, heavy, but with a new, steady current. Gideon's empire unraveled piece by piece. His smugness had been replaced by a chilling silence, his untouchable persona dismantled by handcuffs and endless court dates. I spent those weeks buried in paperwork, working with Drake, visiting Eli, and just trying to remember what normal even felt like. Then, one rainy Thursday evening, there was a tentative knock at my apartment door. I opened it to find Serena standing there. But it wasn't the Serena I'd known for years. The perfectly composed, sharp-tongued sister who hid in Gideon's shadow. This was a stripped-down version of her. No makeup, hair pulled into a limp ponytail, eyes red and swollen like she hadn't slept in days. She clutched her coat around her like armor, but it wasn't enough to shield her. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice so quiet, I almost didn't hear it over the steady patter of rain on the hallway window. I stepped aside, letting her into my small living room. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring at the floor, as if she needed to find the courage somewhere between the scuffed tiles. And then it came, the words tumbling out of her in broken fragments. "I was scared," she said, her voice cracking. "I let him control everything. He told me what to think, what to say. He made me believe I'd be nothing without him. And I let him turn me against you." The weight of it pressed against my chest. This was the sister I'd grown up with. The one I'd thought I'd lost long before Gideon drained my accounts or rewrote my father's will. Tears streaked down her face as she went on. "I didn't just lose a husband," she said, collapsing into the armchair like her legs had simply given out. "I lost myself. And I let him take you from me, too. I'm so sorry." I sat across from her, hands clasped tightly in my lap. My first instinct was pure anger. Anger for the silence. The complicity. The way she'd stood by him while I was humiliated in front of our entire family. But beneath it, a profound sadness swirled. She wasn't just apologizing for Gideon. She was apologizing for every moment she hadn't been my sister when I needed her most. "You could have stopped him," I said finally, my voice low. She nodded, her chin trembling. "I know. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life." For a long while neither of us spoke. The rain kept